Greetings, Edifier Teachers community. My name is Kwame, and I've been in the education field for the past 17 years, primarily as a middle school math teacher. But I've also taken on roles as an instructional coach, an education consultant, a teacher development specialist, among other roles. And I've also written books that focus on the importance of teacher identity and mentorship in our profession. Over the years, I have facilitated a number of professional development workshops. I've spoken at different universities where they have teacher prep programs. So just to name a few, Worcester State University, I've spoken at Boston College, I've spoken at Radford University in Virginia, and many other universities over the course of my career, all focus on this important issue. And I've also served as an ambassador for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in Massachusetts, where we were charged with looking for people of color in targeted school districts who had an interest in becoming teachers, because the need for teacher diversity is still a significant one, even as I'm speaking now. But back in 2017, I was part of that inaugural cohort called the Inspired Network that really started this teacher diversity work, which is still going on today. So when I look at my wealth of experiences, I'm somebody that has benefited from mentoring from other veteran teachers, but I've also seen the impact. I felt the impact of not having the mentorship early on in my career. And so part of my reason for wanting to be an edifier is to give back and to pass on all the knowledge and all the experiences I've had throughout my career and use that as a guide to help the teachers who are coming down the pipeline. In thinking about the mission and the values of Edifying Teachers, many of those values and beliefs resonate with me personally when I look back at my career. The first one is definitely modeling. As a teacher, how can you grow in your craft if you don't have visual examples of what it looks like to be effective in and out of the classroom? So thinking back to the beginning of my career, I was fortunate to be a teacher assistant for many phenomenal teachers, which gave me the opportunity to see them in action, to see the mistakes they made, to see the ways in which they responded on days where they weren't their best, but also to see how they prepared every day, how they interacted with students. To be able to have that visual education for those first 4 years before becoming a full-time teacher were significant, because by the time it became my turn to become a full-time teacher, I already had a foundation for what I wanted my classroom to be. Although there were still some growing pains that I had to go through, the transition was much easier because I had that model to draw from. Now, the second belief that resonated with me was the mentoring. And we know that Edifying Teachers is all about teacher mentoring and helping teachers grow. And I would not be here today if I didn't have mentors along the way who were gracious enough to invest their time, their space, and their energy to ensure that I was at my best personally and professionally, to make sure that I was aware of opportunities that would allow me to stretch myself professionally as a teacher, to talk confidence into my spirit. I needed all those mentors to do that for me so that I could be where I am today. And I simply want to do the same for those teachers who are coming down the Edifying Teachers pipeline. And then the third thing I would say is mindset. As teachers, we need to have a growth mindset. We need to look at things from an asset-based perspective. When we look at things from a deficit-based perspective, we then find ourselves focused on the things where we're not as strong, as opposed to emphasizing the strong parts of our practice that allow us to thrive. So a growth mindset helps reinforce the idea that even in areas where we need to grow, that's an opportunity to get better. And I believe that mentees need to get that messaging in order to continue to persist, in order to continue to persevere through challenges, which they will come across in this profession. Anybody who's been in this profession for an extended amount of time knows that there are ups and downs. There are hills and valleys that you have to leap over in order to see the light and to get to that finish line, whatever that is for that person. And I just believe that that can't happen if we're not building growth mindsets in our mentees. I think my why for teaching is pretty simple. Back in 2006, I was a school-based core member for a nonprofit organization called Education Works. And my first school placement was at a school called Duckery Elementary, which was not too far from my alma mater's main campus, Temple University. And at the time, the demographic breakdown was 90% Black, and then the remaining 10% was a combination of Asian, Latinx, and Indigenous students. So looking at that breakdown and then going into classrooms as a core member, seeing white teacher after white teacher in every classroom, I started to wonder, why is it that in this school where 9% of the teachers are Black, we have the converse of that in the teacher faculty where majority of them are white? And so I started to wonder, how can that be the case? And how can I play a role in connecting with students, particularly Black and brown students? Because in the end, when you look at the Black community, and this has been my experience and what I've seen throughout my life, most of our young Black and brown children gravitate towards professional athletes and musical artists. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's no knock on them. But then I started to wonder, what if they saw people who looked like them who were teachers? Maybe if they saw more of people like me who were in front of them in the classroom, they would then aspire to become teachers themselves. So that was my main reason for wanting to become a teacher, because one, I have a love for children, but two, I wanted to be a positive Black male role model for Black and brown boys. And that's still my mission to this day, 17 years later. I think one of the great things about mentoring is that it's not a one-size-fits-all model. I think it all depends on the teacher you're working with. Every teacher has their set of needs that need to be met. So depending on what those needs are, as a mentor, I have to adjust my approach to meet the needs of that teacher. So as far as some of the components that are part of my approach, I think number one, having those consistent cycles of feedback so that teachers know in real time how they can improve in the classroom, what they're doing well, and just how they can continue to grow. And I think as a mentor, it's my responsibility to help in the capacity building of teachers. They need to be aware of continuous professional development opportunities that will allow them to grow in their craft. So that means directing them to videos, to webinars, to other people who may have expertise in certain fields that they're teaching, to teacher conferences that they can attend, to connect and network with other teachers from across the world. So just the capacity building is also a part of my mentoring approach, because how can we expect teachers to grow if we don't give them access to those professional development opportunities? And then another thing that I think is important is something that I said earlier, having an asset-based approach, looking at the assets that people in this case, teachers, are bringing to the table and figuring out ways to build upon that foundation of assets. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to point out the areas where you need to grow. The transparency has to be there. But at the same time, if we're trying to get teachers to have a growth mindset and to have the ability to persevere through any hardships and challenges that they come across in and out of the classroom, we have to be very open and transparent about not only the areas in which they need to grow, but also the areas in which they're thriving, and figuring out ways in which they can continue to thrive in those areas. And then finally, just connecting with teachers and getting to know them. If we're trying to build relationships with our mentees, our teachers, we gotta get to know what their lives are like outside of school. How do their identities shape the way in which they view the world, but also impact the way in which they approach their work as teachers? That we're not gonna know that unless we take the time and make the investment to build on those relationships. So I believe that relationship building is also an important part of mentorship that cannot be overlooked or ignored. I think the most important principle of mentoring or coaching is being consistent and authentic. As a mentor, you're also modeling what it means to be a professional, and your mentees are looking at you with every move that you make. So it's important for you as the mentor to figure out how you can connect with your mentees, but also just recognizing that you have a responsibility to lay that foundation for those mentees. So if we're telling them to be authentic and to come as themselves, we have to do the same in our work with them. We have to be open to acknowledging when we make mistakes. We also have to be open to just sharing those times where we're not thriving, so that they can know that, hey, we have our struggles too. So I do believe that authenticity is important, as well as being consistent. If we're not consistent, how can we expect that from our mentees? If we're not being authentic, how can we expect that from our mentees? So I always believe that those two things should be central to the work that mentors do. As far as how mentees can learn, there are a multitude of ways in which mentees can learn. Obviously, we have teacher conferences, we have videos, we have social media, we have other teachers who are in the same space who can provide some knowledge and expertise on different areas where we want to grow our capacity. I think more than ever, there are an abundance of resources that teachers can draw from in order to grow in their craft. In terms of how they learn, it all depends on what their learning style is. So taking a page from Howard Gardner's Multiple Intelligences, you have some who learn with videos. You have some who would prefer a podcast. You have some who would prefer somebody being in front of their face in person. You have some who are more kinesthetic. So I feel like every teacher has their way of not only taking in information, but also processing it. And in this work of mentorship, it's important to be cognizant of how our mentees learn and take in information so that they can be at their best and deliver the best product in front of their students. So I just think there's a multitude of ways, but it's our responsibility as mentors to figure out and identify the best ways in which our mentees learn, take in, and process information that we're giving them to help build their craft. I think in the end, my mentoring approach stems from the experiences I've had where I either didn't get the mentoring that I needed or times where I did get the mentoring. I know what it's like to not have a mentor. I experienced that during my first year of teaching, where I only had one observation the entire year. I didn't have an instructional coach. I didn't have somebody come into my class every few weeks to give me some advice or counsel or guidance on how to lesson plan, how to prepare, how to interact with students. So that first year was a lot of trial and error, just trying to figure out what makes sense, what works, what doesn't work. But I always believed that it would have been easier if I had a mentor by my side. So I think about that first year for me and how that informs the way in which I deliver my mentoring to mentees. So I just feel like in order to be a good mentor, you have to be a student of your craft. You have to love teaching. You have to be passionate about it. And you also have to be someone who is a continuous learner. So as teachers, we're reflective practitioners. We hear that all the time, but do we truly embody that practice? So for me, when I'm mentoring my mentees, it's important for them to see how hard I work at this craft so that they too can do the same. It's all about modeling at the end of the day. And another thing too about mentorship is that it's not just about what you do in the classroom with the students. It's also about helping that mentee envision their career trajectory. So in my case, I thought I was going to be a teacher my entire life. But then I had mentors along the way who told me, you know what, Kwame, you could be a principal. You know what, Kwame, you'll be a damn good instructional coach. And I started to get those messages, and it got me to a point where I started to take some risk professionally. I started to stretch myself and push myself in ways that were outside of my comfort zone. But all those times allowed me to get better at what I do. And so in that regard, I think part of mentorship is getting the mentees to see the big picture professionally and getting them to recognize that, hey, there are certain things you can do. You're more than just a classroom teacher. You could be a leader in your own school. You could be a superintendent in your school district. Maybe you didn't envision that before. Maybe you didn't think it was possible, but based on what I'm seeing from you on a daily basis, I think this is something that you can manifest for yourself. So I think part of it is almost like being the vision board for the mentee. So I think that's something that I really take seriously in my approach to mentoring.